seeking NERSA concurrence. And I do confirm that NERSA received that request from the Minister in August of 2020, seeking concurrence in relation to a ministerial determination 34 with regards to the procurement of nuclear. And remember, now we're talking about the 2,500 megawatts of a build program. And as is the requirement in this country, it is important that you are able to bring everyone on board, the stakeholders, communities, and everyone, all and sundry, so that they are part of the decision-making process. So NERSA then sits with that responsibility of ensuring that this request is then placed before the public for a public participation process, because there's an established practice in this country is the democratization of key policy decisions, so that you are able to ensure that there's a considerable buy-in by the population. And NERSA started that exercise in February of 2021. That process ran until August of that year, 2021, and it is at that point that then NERSA decided on the back of this public consultation that, yes, we concur with the Minister in relation to this bill program, but then they attached 3 suspensive conditions. So essentially they say, in principle we agree, but there are 3 things that you need to do before you can get this full concurrence. So essentially, for the concurrence to be in place, there are 3 things that the department needed to do. That's what we call, in legal speak, they call them suspensive conditions. And those suspensive conditions need to be satisfied so that the concurrence can kick in. What are those suspensive conditions? The first one was that there has to be a recognition of the fact that technology in the nuclear space has evolved, and therefore the department must illustrate how they are going to take into account the evolution of that technology advancement. The second requirement was that it must further elaborate on the rationality of the 2,500 megawatts. So remember, I said the determination was to procure 2,500 megawatts of nuclear capacity. And of course, in answering that question, you have to compute what we call the demand analysis. You must do a computation of what is the projected, what we call the load profile, the amount of demand that will be placed on the grid post-2030, because there's an admission that you are not going to build this program, you are not going to get this megawatts from nuclear before 2030. I've explained it's a very long process for you to be able to build a nuclear power station, and of course how that fits into the energy mix. So that's what the second suspensive condition. So the department had an obligation to answer that question. And then the third one was that the new nuclear power program should be procured through what we call an EPC procurement contract. EPC means engineering, procurement, and also construction, rather than a fragmented approach. So essentially you have a 10-key engineering company does the design, the actual construction, and then they deliver the power station. And they said that the department had an obligation to come back to NERSA and illustrate how this is going to be achieved. And of course, the department did all that they could to ensure that this is satisfied. And of course, they were successful in producing reports that answers those 3 suspensive conditions, and then they submitted these reports to NERSA. And then NERSA then evaluated these submissions and then arrived at a determination that these are satisfactory, and on the basis of that, then NERSA decided that now you've got the concurrence, you can proceed. And it is during that period that the transition happened in relation to the department that carries the responsibility of Section 34.1. So as you know, that the Ministry of Electricity was then introduced in that period, so it meant that then the responsibility of executing that concurrence set with the Minister of Electricity. And of course, the Minister of Electricity, having satisfied himself with the process followed by the predecessor. Then we arrived at a determination that now we are going to a Gazette. We are going to Gazette this Section 34 determination, and we called a press conference here in the same room to say we are gazetting. Then the next step was to determine the procurement framework. After the ministry had gazetted, then there was an interdict. There was a legal process that was initiated by 3 parties. The first one is the Democratic Alliance. The second one is Earth Life Africa, and the third party is South African Faith Communities Environment Institute. The DA one really is really a procedural issue to say that the minister that is gazetting the process was run by one minister but is gazetted by another minister. So from a legal counsel point of view, it's an issue that could be easily argued. So we don't think that it is that material, and in fact the remedy, if we are requested to make that remedy, it will be easy for us to effect that remedy. But the ones that has been raised by Earth Life Africa and the South African Faith Community Environment Institute, that was substantive. It was substantive in the following sense. Their argument is that, and of course we get to learn of this argument when papers are filed. Their argument is the following, is that yes, NERSA went out initially to say that the minister, DMRE at the time, wants to issue this determination. They ran a public consultation process. That consultation process, various parties participated, upward of 250 parties or so participated in that process. And then on the back of that, NERSA came back and said, I concur, but there are these 3 suspensive conditions that I've mentioned. NERSA then said to the department at the time, answer these suspensive conditions. I just shared with you that the department responded on those suspensive conditions. NERSA received the answers, the report on the suspensive conditions, and then NERSA said, we are fine, you can proceed. What these parties are arguing is the following, is that yes, there was a public participation process. That public participation process resulted in NERSA issuing the concurrence subject to the substantive conditions, suspensive conditions being met. The parties are saying, when the department came back with a report on how they are going to meet the suspensive conditions, instead of NERSA sitting on its own, applying its mind and giving the final concurrence, they are arguing that NERSA had an obligation to subject that report of suspensive condition to another process of public participation. And I said to the team as a minister that we carry the responsibility of ensuring that this process that we are undertaking is subjected to the highest levels of public scrutiny, including our response in relation to the suspensive conditions. And on the back of that, I think that it is proper that we are able to extend an opportunity to these parties and other parties to evaluate, examine, critique, respond to our report in relation to how we are going to meet the suspensive conditions. So in summary, I'm saying as a minister, I agree with these applicants. I agree with Earth Life Africa. I agree with the South African Faith Community Environment Institute that NERSA should have subjected that process to a public participation process. The last thing we want is to do a major build program on the back of suspicion that the department and government is hiding something from the public. So I had said we are going to democratize this process. We are going to make it transparent. There is nothing to hide. And on the basis of that, I then directed that it is important that we accede to that request, essentially saying to council, we are agreeing on what Earth Life Africa is saying and the other party, that this process must be subjected to an additional, if you like, public participation process. So on the back of that, I then take the decision, and this is the announcement I'm making to the country, that I'm withdrawing the Gazette. I'm withdrawing the Gazette to allow for that public participation to happen. The question you will ask, but why is it that this thing did not happen before the Gazette was made? This is the point. The issue of concurrence is in the NERSA domain. It has nothing to do with the ministry. It's an independent body that regulates this space, and the minister can enter into that space. The only time we got to know and be alerted that that process was not subjected to a public consultation process is when the papers were filed and the minister says we are agreeing with them, we are withdrawing that Gazette, we allow for that public participation so that the process is clean, the process is transparent. Of course, there's a penalty you pay as a result of this decision, is that you are delaying the process, but we are happy to delay the process so that we are able to allow for each and every party in the country that wants to add a voice in how we are going to procure this process, for them to be given the opportunity to be able to make that submission. So it will add another 3 to 6 months in the process. We are happy to do that. For as long as we protect the integrity of the process, for as long as we cement the transparency of the process, so that there's general public confidence in the work that we are doing. And as I conclude, I really want to say the following. Nuclear is part of the mix. Nuclear is part of the future. But it's important that as we go out and procure, the procurement process must be able to stand the test of time. And in this instance, is the ability to be able to subject itself to scrutiny. And that's why we're asking NERSA that let's go back to that process, accord the public an opportunity to scrutinize, respond, and then on the basis of that, you can make a determination on concurrence. Once we receive that, we'll issue the Gazette and run and ensure that we procure. And I want to give a really confidence to the South African public that we'll take you every step of the way. That's a commitment we've made. We'll carry South Africans every step of the way to preserve the integrity of any procurement process, including the nuclear procurement process, especially given its checkered history. So it's important that there's an additional responsibility on the part of the minister to ensure that the process is clean and transparent, and that's why we are asking NERSA to ensure that that's subjected to public scrutiny. We're withdrawing, allow the public to make their comments, and NERSA will come back to us, and then once they give us that concurrence on the back of those comments, then we'll be able to proceed with the public procurement, the procurement of nuclear. Thank you very much, Sakane.